Hey everyone, Andrew here, and it's time for another Top 5. Today we'll be looking at the Top 5 Worst Films of 2021. Now, I was a bit hesitant to do this list, because, quite frankly, I'm usually hesitant to do these end of the year lists, because I'm always worried that there's going to be one that I watch in the next few weeks from that year, the past year, that will be worse than anything, or better than anything that I saw. And I have good reason to do that, because that happened. A couple years ago, I did my review for the year, and then a week later I watched Table 19, and that was one of the worst films, definitely the worst film of that year that I'd seen. It was definitely one of the worst films I've ever seen, honestly. I got to mention it the next year where I was like, I'm sorry, this is my actual number one, but I don't, and I didn't want to do that this time, so I've been binge watching a couple shows that I was a bit iffy on, and it's a good thing I did that because one of them ended up here in my bottom 5. So, let's get going. We're going to be talking about the top 5 worst films of 2021. F9, The Fast Saga, or Fast and Furious 9, or whatever you want to call it. I call it garbage. So, Fate of the Furious at the Fast and Furious 8 ended up in my number 2 spot on the worst of that year that it came out, because and to be fair, that film wasn't awful, but it had two things that dragged it down and made it terrible. First was Charlize Theron as the main villain, and the second was everything that happened during the New York scene. That was just bad. With F9, it's a bit of the opposite, in that there's one or two action scenes in this that are great, and then everything else about this film is terrible. Just awful. It has some of the dumbest action of any of these films and stuff. Things are happening that are so stupid and so dumb and so irritating and just make your blood boil. So here's the thing. There are worse films that I have seen this, in 2021. There were worse films that came out. But most of those films didn't have a chance to be better. F9 could have been good. There's a version of this story that could have been watchable, at least. But it is so dumb that it makes it awful. The leaps in logic in this film is just the absolute worst it's ever been in this entire series. It is so bad and so ridiculous and so stupid. And they know they're stupid, and that drives me up the wall. Because there's a whole bunch of action scenes. So you get to the very first action scene where they're all trying to get this item from a crashed airplane. And it's you get a point where Roman is completely surrounded by soldiers with guns, and they all start shooting at him. And they all miss at nearly point-blank range. It's that's worse than Stormtrooper aim. That is ridiculous. And then there's another point where he's walking away, and this car explodes and clearly falls on him. They try, and then they try to play it off no, it fell in front of him and he came out from behind it. No. It clearly looked like it landed on him. There was no way he could have survived that. And then they get to another point where they're going across this rickety bridge, and the bridge gives out, and the car just hovers until it gets to land. It goes so far with nothing under it. It's are you kidding me? There's no way this would work. And then even dumber is Dom's still on the other side of the bridge, with the bad guys, and he's I'm gonna Tarzan this, and drives the car into the little wooden post that has the rope that the bridge was attached to, and then Tarzan swings the car around this canvas and lands it safely. My brain was melting out of my ears. It was so stupid. And it's okay, fine, the action is dumb. I can turn my brain off that. That's fine. But then the story is super complicated and hard to follow and doesn't make a lot of sense. And it doesn't help that they keep flashbacking to Dom and his brother as kids with their dad. But the actors playing the young Vin Diesel and young John Cena look nothing like Vin Diesel or John Cena. I was watching this with my mom, and she kept getting confused on which was which, and so was I, because they don't look anything like the people they're supposed to. And the story got so convoluted and so hard to follow with all of these flashbacks that I actively had to keep thinking about the plot, trying to have it make sense. And I got to a point in this film where I started punching my skull to try and turn my brain off because it hurt so much from trying to keep this plot straight, but also from all of the bleeding from how stupid it is. Like, I'm gonna get a brain aneurysm from this stupid film. It is so bad. Just mind-breakingly bad. And I wish this was my worst film of the year. Like, if some of the action scenes hadn't been good, and had John Cena not given a decent performance, this could have easily been the worst film I've ever seen. Like, it's so stupid. The logic of this film is so dumb. The only way I made it through is I started telling myself, okay, this is all a computer simulation. None of this is real. Or Dom ended up in a coma at the end of F7, and this 8 and 7 have been in coma dreams. That's the only way these films make any freaking sense. Like, geez Louise, they went to freaking space in this one. We used to joke about that because it's so ridiculous, why would you do that? And then they freaking did it and tried to play it off as, like, yeah, we're doing what you want. Like, no, we were joking, you stupid idiots. Ugh. Charlize Theron is back in an even uglier haircut. And that's amazing considering the dreadlocks she was rocking in the first one, but now she's got an even stupider bowl cut. Thankfully, she's not the main villain, but the main villains aren't that interesting because you have John Cena, who is decent performance, but he never comes off as a remote villainous character. And then you have his boss, who is just rich white kid. Dom is basically invincible in this one. I think he figured out a cheat code to give himself invulnerability because he just does everything and survives all this stuff. There's a point where he fights off 15 soldiers in full armor, falls 100 feet into water, managed to get knocked unconscious, but somehow Letty, who he had just locked on another side of the door 100 feet up, got all the way downstairs into the water and managed to rescue him through all of this rubble and all of these other people. And it's like, how? How did this happen? And they bring up how stupid this plot is. There's a point where Roman is talking to Tej about, how in the world do we keep surviving all this? How did I survive all those gunshots without getting shot? How did I do this? And Tej goes, maybe you're stupid. And it's like, and I get what they were doing. This is meta commentary at its worst. This is, hey, how did we survive these stupid things? Because shut up. If we acknowledge it, it's not as bad as writing as it is. I'm like, no, it's actually worse. Because you know you're doing something stupid and bad, and you're giving yourself an easy out. Like, jeez Louise, like, just the things that they do survive in this. There's so many times where someone is falling to their death, and they land on top of a car and survive. Like, the car is like somehow a pillow. And some of the action scenes kind of work, though. Like, when they get to the magnets, and they are crashing cars through buildings, and are moving the cars through all that, that's kind of cool. That scene alone bumps this a little higher. Those action scenes alone are pretty much the only reason this isn't in my bottom 2. Because honestly, this one pisses me off probably more than any of my other ones on the list. But because this one could have been good. We brought back Han from the dead, which I liked Han. I'm glad to see Han back. I wish we'd gotten a better explanation for how he survived, but as good as anything, I guess. I mean, better that than him being like a robot or a super soldier. But the way they find him is the dumbest thing, where it's like, oh, we need to find him to get this other piece. Well, he's obviously still in Tokyo, because reasons. Because to him, Tokyo is his Mexico, which Mexico represents this happiest time of Dom's life. Okay, so, and they go to Tokyo, and they find this house, or this apartment building, with a Mexican flag in the window. And they just break into this house. And I'm like, this film would have gone up a notch if they'd broken into that house, and there'd just been a Mexican family in there eating tacos. Like, You know there are families from all over the world. Like, there's going to be a Mexican family in Tokyo that might have a Mexican flag in their windows. They're proud of where they came from. I watched the Everything Wrong with This, and they summed that up perfectly with what's wrong with F9. But it got to a point where it's like, okay, here's this big MacGuffin thing that could take over all of the satellites and destroy all of the internet all over the world. And they asked the question in that one's like, so what was the remote possible good thing you could have done with this tech? Like, because the people that made this clearly wanted to make this for a good reason, but literally everything that this thing has been described to do sounds horrific. And it's like, yeah, no, it's terrible, and they didn't give any reason for it to be used for any kind of good reason. So, lazy writing. Like, just the worst writing in this. There was like a 2-second moment where it could have gone better, where I thought Charlize Theron's character had died in a plane crash, and I was like, yes, please. And it was a simulator. And she's fine, because she has to do another film. And I'm telling you right now, if F10 starts with Charlize Theron's character taking a rocket to the face and dying in the first 2 minutes, I will automatically like that film more than the last 3 Fast and the Furious films. Like, automatically that will be a 3 stars right there. The rest of the film can be worse than any of the others at all, and I will still give it a 3-star rating for killing Charlize Theron in the first 5 seconds. Like, gee, I hate that character so much. God. And the annoying thing is, we're getting 2 more. And I'm gonna see them. Because I'm a freaking completionist, unfortunately. And I have a really hard time not doing that with certain films. Especially if I care about how they end. I'm having that right now because I keep seeing ads for Hotel Transylvania 4 Transformia. And I didn't even watch the 3rd one, but the ads for 4 are making me going, maybe I should watch 3 and 4. And on my other side of my brain going, you hated all of those films that you have seen. Yeah, but maybe 3 and 4 are pretty decent. They're probably not. I doubt it. But the thought is never going to stop in my brain until I watch them. I hate that part of my brain, honestly. I really wish I could just give up on things like that. Like, yeah, I don't need to know how fast. Like, they just gotten terrible. Why would I care? Like, because I still care, and I don't know why. John Cena saves the film a little bit. The action scenes are pretty good. But, honestly, watch the film on DVD where you can pause it and take a break from it, because this is a film that will hurt your brain. It's not fun, and I do not recommend it. So, we didn't get Dwayne Johnson in F9. Instead, we got him in his own action-adventure film that's going to get sequels, along with Ryan Reynolds and Gal Gadot in Red Notice. And, woof. Oof. I had high hopes for this film. I saw the trailer like a month before it came out, and I was excited. Like, that looked decent. Like, I'm like, I love Dwayne Johnson. I love Ryan Reynolds. I like Gal Gadot. I like Ryan and Dwayne can usually take terrible films and make them watchable. Like, I've seen Green Lantern and Blade 3 multiple times because I like Ryan Reynolds, and I've seen Tooth Fairy and freaking, so many. I've seen most of Dwayne's, and it's like, yeah, they usually can salvage terrible films. This is not one they could salvage. Like, Ryan Reynolds is just doing the Deadpool shtick again, except now it's even worsely written than it has been in even the Hitman's Bodyguard, which I didn't get to see the sequel to that one this year. I wish I had, but it just didn't happen. And I honestly, even without seeing it, I will say it probably was better written than this Red Notice film was. It was just bad. There's not a single thing Ryan Reynolds did in the entire film that was remotely funny. Dwayne Johnson gives the most uninterested, lazy performance I've ever seen from him. And that's amazing, because I've watched most of his career. Like, I watched him when he started in wrestling to now. He was known as the most charismatic superstar in the world, and he's lived up to that in the movies. And the fact that this, of all films, is the film that he just kind of goes, I'm here. What do you want me to do? Just, like, really? Wow. He had no energy and did not care. And then you have Gal Gadot, who seemed like she was doing this as a favor to someone and didn't want to do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was drunk the entire time, because she certainly seemed it, especially when she was singing. Yeah, and it's poorly shot. It's like for $100 million Netflix thing, they use a lot of terrible green screens. And I get the fact that they filmed a chunk of this during the pandemic stuff and all that, but it's still like, ugh, it's just so bad. The story's terrible. The MacGuffins are stupid. Like, they're going after the Egyptian Fabergé eggs, and it's like, that's not a thing that exists. Like, Fabergé eggs are a very specific thing from a very specific place and a very specific time. Like, those are not a thing you would find throughout history. And, like, you have Ryan Reynolds is the second best thief, and he's trying to outdo the greatest thief, known as the Bishop, who may or may not be Gal Gadot, and just some of the stuff that happens is the stupidest thing. There's a point in this where Dwayne Johnson gets attacked by a bull and walks it off. Let me say that again. The Brahma bull got gored by an actual bull and walked it off like he got hit by a pillow. And you have the other antagonist that isn't Gal Gadot, who is the Interpol agent that's trying to stop them. And I wouldn't have been surprised if she turned out to be a villain, because by the end, her Interpol agents turned into mercenaries and terrorist-looking guys. And I'm like, is she the Bishop? Because that would make more sense than her having these weirdos as part of her Interpol team. But nope, she's fine. It's someone else entirely, and it was not I was surprised, but I also didn't care, and it didn't do anything, and it didn't work for it. They spent the whole movie trying to push Dwayne Johnson and Gal Gadot together as a couple, and they had no chemistry whatsoever. And I don't know if it's just because Dwayne Johnson just doesn't do that type of chemistry extremely well, or it's just they just didn't mesh well. I would say they just didn't mesh well. They didn't work off well. Probably didn't help that Gal Gadot seemed drunk for the whole thing. But yeah, and it's just not funny, not interesting. It wants to be Indiana Jones meets To Catch a Thief meets James Bond, and it fails in all regards. It's and of course, it's a film that a really high, audience score on Rotten Tomato for some reason, even though I think it's truly terrible. And it's getting 2 sequels, because of course it is. Here's hoping my completionist in me doesn't want to watch those, because the one was enough. Like, I don't feel like I should watch the others, but who knows? We'll see. Voyagers. So I think my review that I did for Letterboxd for this summed it up really easily, which is, how do you take Lord of Lies in space and make it boring as hell? Like, jeez Louise, this film was so dry and annoying. Because it's literally Lord of the Flies. It's a bunch of kids with hormones trapped in a space that they can't leave, and they have to figure out how to survive. It's like, but now we have girls in the mix, so the whole thing gets a little bit rapey. But we also have a bunch of kids and actors who have zero personality or energy or charisma. Like, wow. And that's after they stop taking the pills that take away all of their emotions. Like, even you can't really tell there's a big difference between them with emotions and them without emotions. It's like, the only thing that kind of works in this is Colin Farrell as the leader of the ship, but he's dead within the first half hour and not in it even that much to begin with, so it's like, okay. And there's a point where, like, the main protagonist finds out that the main antagonist killed him and has video proof of it, and then proceeds to do nothing about it. Like, I'm like sitting there going, you literally have proof this guy murdered your captain. You show that in the lunch hall, you get the entire crew behind you, and you throw that jackass out the airlock. Instead of letting him find guns and try to take over. And it was so dry. Like, you could tell the director wanted to do stuff with this. There's some interesting visuals. Like, there's weird transition things, and there's like an infinite hallway, and it's like they tried to do something, but it's just so boring. Nothing in it. Nothing in it is interesting. I couldn't give less of a darn. There are so much better sci-fi stories of this ilk out there. You're better off watching Pandemonium. This is just nothing in this worth watching at all whatsoever. Definitely not. Definitely a skip on this one. So, my number 2, I only watched because I watched a review for someone reviewing the one that ended up being my number 1. And they were like, that film was terrible. But it's not the worst film of the year. If you want to see that, then you should watch Father Christmas is Back. And I did. And it's not as bad as my number 1. It's dang close, though. Like, just like that. Like the only thing that keeps this better, or being slightly better than my number 1, is there was actually a decent performance in this. Whereas there was nothing. Like, there's one nugget of redeemability in this film where there's nothing in that one. So, Finding Father Christmas is a Netflix original film that they tried to bury. Like, I had to dig for this. I had to look. I had to try really hard to find this. And I've only ever seen them do that, like, once before. They did that with the TV show Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. And that show's actually really, really good. I'm sad that they don't advertise that they did that more, because it was an extremely good show, and it deserves a lot of love, whereas this deserves all of the hate. Like, the first 30 minutes of this film is some of the worst filming I've ever seen. This is the worst put-together film. And I'm putting that up there with, like, Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny, where you just see Santa sitting on a sleigh for an hour and a half. Like, it's that level of bad. It's like the main actress in this is literally the living embodiment of nails on a chalkboard. She's just for the first half hour. All of the side characters are terrible. All of the cast is terrible. There's 2 exceptions. Okay, so you have the titular Father Christmas, who is played by Kelsey Grammer, and his brother, who is played by John Cleese. Now, Kelsey Grammer is the kind of actor who takes everything that he's given and gives 110% and tries to make the best film he possibly can. Like, you could tell in this film that he is trying as hard as he can to drag this out of the mud. Like, he is giving at least an Emmy-worthy performance, if not an Oscar-worthy performance, to try and make this film salvageable. And everyone else is just dragging him through the mud. And he's legitimately great in this. And then you have John Cleese, who isn't quite as good. He seems more like he stumbled on set more often than playing an actual character. He has a few moments where he's actually pretty funny and works really well. There's a point where these 2 characters end up in a fisticuffs, and Grammer's character's like, alright, I'm gonna fight you, I'm gonna punch you, I'm gonna knock your block off. Actually, you know what? I don't think I should do this. This is probably not the best thing to do. And you just see a punch come out of nowhere, and John Cleese is going, I can take you. I've got more where that's coming from. And I'm like looking at John Cleese going, dude, you can barely lift up your arms to throw that punch, let alone actually do anything. But yeah, though that one little scene there is like the best scene, and then everything else is terrible. That said, the last 15 minutes of the film are actually kind of watchable. It's like a half-decent Lifetime film. Not Hallmark. I think Hallmark is much better quality. Is a better quality, because, like, I can watch Hallmark films, whereas Lifetime films I've given up on, because most of them are just true trash. But it's mostly watchable, and I enjoy quite a bit of it. Let me rephrase that. But the last 15 minutes of it actually kind of work and salvage the film a little bit, keep it from being completely terrible. Let's move on to dishonorable mentions. And if you're wondering why in the world I'm in a different shirt with my hair a different way, it's because the recordings that I did for the original thing got completely destroyed. For this part, at least. So yeah, I'm doing this a week later. So somehow, even though despite the fact that I did 3 separate recordings, I completely lost all of the dishonorable mentions and my number 1 of the worst films of the year. This video has been cursed. I can tell you right now. One of the recordings had no audio whatsoever. One only had me talking about the first film and none of the others. And then the other one only had me talking about the bottom 4. And so this video has been cursed. So yeah. Anyway, some dishonorable mentions. Now at the start of the recording of this, I talked about how I did see worse films than F9, but those films didn't have the potential to be good. And which is why F9 had, with its wasted potential, made it into my bottom 5. One of the films that had no potential to be good, that was worse than F9, was Tom and Jerry. Now, it's a live-action Tom and Jerry film. Did any of us think this was going to be remotely good? I mean, I've been proven wrong before. The Dora the Explorer movie was really good, and that should not have been. But it's a live-action Tom and Jerry, and Tom and Jerry barely works as a half-hour show. We've tried to make Tom and Jerry movies before. We had the original animated film in the 80s that I think is passable, but isn't really great even by my forgiving standards. We have all of the direct-to-video ones where they just shove them into other films. So it's like Willy Wonka and Tom and Jerry Go to Oz, and Tom and Jerry meet Fast and the Furious. Which, even without seeing it, might have been better than Fast 9. And all of those are truly terrible because the animation is absolute garbage. And you know what that has in common with this film? The animation is absolutely garbage. They tried to do the similar thing with this, where they were like, okay, we're going to focus on the human characters and not Tom and Jerry. The Tom and Jerry are just going to be causing antics in the background. Okay, great. So who are we following? Oh, Chloe Grace Moretz as a person who lies to get a job and then spends the whole movie trying to prove that she's actually good at the job. Her character is terrible. All of the side characters are terrible. They even kind of ruined Tom and Jerry a bit. Tom is fine. Tom is about the same as he's always been. Jerry in this one is kind of evil and terrible. He's always kind of had a bit of that mean streak, but usually he has a great justification for some of it. It's like, I'm just trying to get food to survive. I'm just trying to, not be eaten by this cat that's trying to murder me. But in this one, he comes off vindictive and just kind of really mean-spirited. It's like, so we first see Jerry, he's viewing this abandoned car being tour guided by a rat who's like, oh yeah, that's a great place to live. And Jerry just looks at it and goes, I'm too good for this, and turns and leaves. Then he runs into Tom in the park, and Tom is performing in the park pretending to be a blind cat who can play the piano. There's a little sign that says, Tom, the blind piano playing cat. And he's making money that way. And Jerry sees this, and he should be offended that this cat is swindling people out of money with a lie, because he is not blind. But no, Jerry is jealous that Tom is making money and tries to get in on the act. So he climbs up the keyboard and starts posing on the end of the keyboard like he is the jazz singer to a piano player. And except for the fact, that he's not singing. So he's just posing there for a good 45 seconds for no real reason. He then jumps down, sets up his own little sign in his own little cup that says Jerry the Dancing Mouse, and starts dancing to the music Tom is making, and they start putting money in both cups. So Jerry not only isn't mad that this cat's swindling people, but now is actively stealing money from Tom. I'm sorry, you don't do this. This is how homeless people get stabbed. You do not go on someone else's spot and try to make money. That's not how this works. I am 100% on Tom's side at this point, where it's like, yes, eat that freaking mouse that's stealing your money. And then you get to a later point where Jerry has moved into the hotel, and he just comes out of the shower, and he's drying himself off with the towel, and he's looking out the window at the pouring rain, and sees Tom basically drowning in the rainwater, and just kind of smiles and laughs. And it's like, any other version of Tom and Jerry, he would have a half second of going, oh, that poor cat, maybe I should let him in, and then go, wait, no, that cat's tried to murder me multiple times, screw him. But this one, no, he is taking pleasure in this cat's suffering. It just didn't work in any way whatsoever for me. It wasn't absolutely awful, but it was fairly close. I then watched a film called The Little Things, which had Denzel Washington, Rami Malek, and Jared Leto in it, and it was a slow burner thriller about cops trying to figure out who was doing these serial killer murders, and it was boring as hell. I was falling asleep for most of this film. Like, Denzel gives a kind of meh performance. I've seen him do this better. Remy tries, but isn't that interesting. Jared Leto is in it, and I'm happy to see he got work, but he doesn't add anything to it. The only thing that kind of I could even really just say about the film is, like, I'm pretty sure the person that they take out thinking he's the serial killer trying to stop him isn't actually the serial killer. But I couldn't tell you for certain because I could not be bothered to pay any more attention to this. I saw Coming to America, the sequel to Coming to America, a 20-year later sequel to a comedy starring Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall. And it's okay. It's not terrible. It's watchable. It has way too many musical numbers. Some of the comedy works, most of it doesn't. For a 20-year later sequel, this is passable at best. My one kind of real problem with it is that it kind of hurts Akeem's character, or Eddie Murphy's character. Like, Prince Akeem was this kind of stalwart, very positive, very great character in the original, and in this one, he's more like his father was. And it makes sense. They do a decent job of explaining why he's that way and what is going on. But it's just, like, I feel like Akeem would, figure things out a little differently or try to do things a little bit differently or make, considering he fought so hard to be able to choose who he got to marry and this, that, and the other, it's amazing that he so easily gave into, I'm just going to do everything my father told me to do before he died. Yeah. And a lot of the jokes just didn't work, and some of the stuff just, yeah. I wanted to like it. I thought it was fine. I enjoyed it by the end, but I could not say it was a good film. I watched Spiral, from the Book of Saw. This was the first of the Saw films I've ever seen. And if you're wondering why in the world I went and saw the 8th or 9th Saw film first, because it had Chris Rock. Honestly, that's pretty much the only reason I even gave this the time of day. I've never had an interest in the Saw films because I know that from 2 on they become very torture porn and very graphic, and that's never been something I'm super interested in. I do kind of want to watch the first Saw film, but that's more from people telling me it's amazing, and I need to at least watch that one than from anything in this film, because Spiral is awful. Chris Rock is not great in this film. He's not well cast in it, which is weird because they built the film around him, and it just does not fit his style of acting or performing. His father is played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he's passable at best in this. It's not great. The traps and stuff are kind of interesting, but not the best. Like I said, it's a little graphic for my taste in the violence, but I could stomach some of it. The twist on who the villain was and why they were doing this and what was going on was just kind of, it didn't do anything or make it interesting. And my opinion on this is kind of how I felt about all of the Saw films in general, which is we don't really need more of this. I think we're good. I think 8 or 9 is enough now. Can we stop and leave this alone? I say the same thing for Paranormal Activity. We don't need any more of those. We can stop and do other stories. I watched Willy's Wonderland with Nicolas Cage. And this one was okay at moments. I liked Nicolas Cage in it. He's really interesting. He plays a mute badass who is stuck cleaning up this abandoned Chuck E. Cheese-esque place. So basically the film is a live-action Five Nights at Freddy's. With the Five Nights at Freddy's LP. But it has such weird things about it. There's a whole thing where it's Nicolas Cage's character is you get an hour of cleaning and then you can have a 15-minute break. So he has a watch, and every hour it goes off and he goes into the break room and plays on a pinball machine. And that's fine, but he does that for the entire film. So even after the monsters start attacking him, he still will stop whatever he's doing, go into the break room and play this pinball game for 15 minutes. And it's like, after the third monster attack, wouldn't you be trying to, like, escape? Or hunt down the monsters so they can stop attacking you? Also, why don't any of the monsters go after him in this break area? Seems like a great time to attack him. He's clearly distracted. I also didn't like any of the creatures in this, any of the villains. They were all really weird and poorly designed. I didn't like their backstory of how they came to be. The side female character was pretty good, but they had a whole thing with a cop that was not interesting. And the whole film is just kind of meh by the end. And it's like, and the weird thing is, like, this isn't the first Five Nights at Freddy's knockoff film that we've had. There was another film a couple of years ago called the Banana Splits movie. And it was kind of the same thing, where it's like the similar ideas. And it's interesting comparing the two, because the Banana Split movie and the Willy's Wonderland have opposite problems. Like, Willy's Wonderland has a great hero and lead, and has a not great villains and not great kills. Banana Splits movies has terrible leads. Every lead in that is terrible, but the creature monsters are really good, and the deaths are really good. So it's like, if you fuse them together, we would get a good Five Nights at Freddy's film. But by the time we get an actual Five Nights at Freddy's film, it's going to be passé, because we've already had versions of it, and none of them have been that great. There was a couple of made-for-TV ones that I have to mention. Mistletoe in Montana with Melissa Joan Hart was boring as hell. Like, she played a female rancher and that ran this dude ranch that would have people come up and visit and be, ranchers for a weekend. So it's all about her helping this city family, step away from technology and learn to appreciate nature. Except it doesn't work on any level whatsoever. Like, I love Melissa Joan Hart. I've seen most of her Christmas films. This one is easily the worst of her Christmas films. And there was one where she was dating a snowman. And this is much worse than that one was. Like, it just doesn't work on any level. And then there's one I have to mention, because it has driven me mad for a year. And that is a film called It Was Always You. It Was Always You is a pretty typical kind of story. It's a woman is engaged to be married, and she's miserable because she's engaged to be married to the wrong person but doesn't realize it. She runs into an old flame. He mansplains to her everything wrong about her life. She eventually falls in love with him again, and they end up together. It's a passable plot. The plot is not the problem I have with this. I have a problem with one very specific thing. So the main girl and her fiancé go to this oyster bar. The main girl wants to order the key lime pie. She asks the waitress for the key lime pie. The waitress looks at her and goes, "Oh, you can't order the key lime pie. You can only get the key lime pie after you've eaten a bucket of oysters. House rules." And she's like, "Well, what if I have an oyster allergy?" And the waitress looks at her and goes, "Well, then I would recommend the burger shop up the street." And I'm just staring at this going, So you're turning away a paying customer because of why? Like, I'm sorry, there's no restaurant in the world that would turn around a paying customer like this. And I work in restaurants. I know that restaurants can have the weirdest and dumbest rules. I'm working at a restaurant right now that sells pommes frites, which are garlic fries with parsley and Parmesan cheese. We used to sell them by themselves as an individual side that you could get. But after pandemic and going back to reopening, we are only serving it with specific entrees. Why? They have never made 100% clear to me. But basically, yeah, they have really specific rules, like the kids can't get it with the kids' items, you can't get it with certain entrees, you can't get it by itself, no matter how much you ask. Those rules are dumb, and they know they're dumb, but I can at least talk to the chefs and talk to the managers and make an argument to try and get this. Because I had that happen where I had a guest with an allergy that only could eat the fries. I only could eat, like, plain fries. And it only took me, like, 8 minutes of arguing with them, but I got them to do it. Like, this woman didn't even attempt that. She's just like, "No, you can't have pie." Like, okay. So they order a bucket of oysters. Then they order 2 glasses of red wine. The waitress comes back with 2 open bottles of beer and puts them on the table. The woman and the fiancé are like, "We didn't order these." And the waitress is like, "I know," and walks away. So not only did you give them the wrong item, you didn't listened to them when they told you gave them the wrong item. You put the beers on the table open, and then you didn't take the beers away when they said that this is what they wanted. So now, not only are you being extremely rude to your guests, you are wasting product, thus costing your restaurant money. Like, she has to own this place. Like, that's the only explanation for why she hasn't been fired already. Like, and if she owns this place, she's gonna get sued. Because you do not talk to guests like this. You do not talk to customers who are willing to pay like this. And you definitely don't just, like, if you don't have red wine, you could be like, oh, we don't have red wine. You don't bring them something else that they don't want. Especially beer. Like, maybe water. But, like, it's just like watching that enraged me. I was so angry. And it's like, it's been a year, and I'm still mad about that. Home Sweet Home Alone. Yeah, I don't know why I watched this. I was smart enough not to watch 4 or 5, despite my, completionist mentality. I looked at those and went, those are terrible, but somehow, some way, something convinced me to give Home Sweet Home Alone a chance. Maybe because I thought it would make this list. I'm not 100% sure. But I watched it, and it is god awful. It is terrible. And here's the thing. I'm someone who defends Home Alone 3. I think Home Alone 3 is a decent film on its own. I don't think it's as good as 1 or 2, but I think it stands okay on its own 2 feet. This one is just awful from the moment it starts. Like, so we have the kid for the lead for this one, and it's the best friend character from Jojo Rabbit. And he was a cute, charming kid in Jojo Rabbit, and he is a complete and utter piece of garbage in this film that I just hated from the word go. Like, first line out of his mouth, I'm like, I hate this kid. I was waiting for the Wet Bandits to show up and to do everything they ever threatened to do to Kevin on this brat. Like, I hated him so much. And doesn't do anything to make himself likable or redeemable or anything. Then we have our bandits, who is this loving married couple who are just trying to save their house so that they and their family don't end up destitute on the street. And they think Kevin has stolen this doll from them that's worth hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million of dollars. And so they're just trying to get back property they think has been stolen. And so you just made the bandits, we are going to watch get tortured and set on fire, the most sympathetic and relatable characters in the film. Why? Why would you do that? No one wants to see Tiny Tim get set on fire. Like, you don't make the nice, likable characters the characters who are going to receive Looney Tune violence. You make them, terrible pricks that you want to see suffer. It's the same problem I had with Tom and Jerry. It's like, they made Tom somewhat relatable, so watching Jerry do all this crap to him felt terrible. And it's just like, why? Ugh. And then we get to the actual traps and all of the stuff that they do that. And one of the traps that he set up was Legos. He just spread Legos all over the floor because, it hurts when you step on a Lego. Yeah, you know what actually hurts? Stepping on broken glass like Kevin McAllister did in the first film. Yeah. There was one decent trap where he set the woman's feet on fire through covering the ground with kerosene. That was actually a smidge traumatic for me. I was like, that was a little rough. But the trap right before that, he literally was standing on the second floor balcony. He brought out a thing of cola, dropped a Mentos in it, closed it, shook it, and dropped it into the snow below him. It landed in the snow and sat there and didn't explode. And the woman, because these bandits are super geniuses, goes up and starts touching the thing so that it explodes in her face. Yeah, no, I don't feel sympathy for her at that point, because anyone with half a brain would have seen that thing fall and not explode and gone and walked around it. Who would touch it? Why would you do that? Stupid. And the husband isn't any better. He has a point where he has VR goggles put on his head and he thinks he's been transported to the Grand Canyon and doesn't somehow feel the weight of the Oculus on his head, even though that thing weighs like 3 pounds. Like, ugh. Then you have all of the side characters, who are all terrible. The mom is terrible, the families are terrible, the kids are definitely terrible, the bandit's family is terrible. Kenan Thompson is in this, and he's terrible. There is one tiny little bright spot in the entire film, and that is that they brought Buzz McAllister back as a security guard watching that neighborhood. And he's in the movie for less than 5 minutes, and he's easily the only thing remotely watchable in the entire film. Like, he has a couple lines that are actually somewhat funny. Like, there's a point where he gets a call in about the kid being locked out in the house. Like, there's a kid home alone in this, and he goes and looks at the house and sees that it has a McAllister security thing on front. And he goes, it's just a prank, don't worry about it. And the guy on the radio is like, what? And it's like, oh yeah, it's my brother. So a couple years ago, my family left him home alone on Christmas twice. And now every year he calls me and messes with me this way. And that's the best joke in the entire film. And it's kind of delivered the same way I did, which if you're not laughing, that's kind of how I reacted. And I'm still like, this is easily the best joke in the entire film. Like, yeah, and then he's gone and never seen or mentioned again. And it's just like, and I just look at this film and I just go, why? Why was this made? Why do we need this? Is there any point in bothering with this? And the answer is Disney got the right to Fox, and they wanted to recreate some of the properties that made Fox big. Okay, fine. If you're going to do Home Alone, why not bring back Macaulay Culkin and Joe Pesci and do an actual sequel or an actual, how about we do an actual reboot for Home Alone if we're going to do this, and have Macaulay Culkin play the dad? Or do what someone was pitching, where Macaulay Culkin has been traumatized by the events of the first 2 films and now is trying to break into the bandit's house, and they're setting up traps to defend themselves from Macaulay Culkin's character. Those are more interesting than what we got. And it's like, and you can't tell me we couldn't get, Macaulay Culkin to do this. He's shown up as Kevin McAllister twice for commercials. And Joe Pesci has shown up as his Wet Bandit character for commercials. I get that Marv might be a little bit harder to get. I don't know. I can't remember if that actor is dead or not. But we could have done something with this. Instead, we get a terrible rehash that has nothing to do with anything, has nothing likable, is absolute garbage, and is completely unwatchable as far as I'm concerned. Like, it's terrible. It's truly awful. And is it worse than 4 and 5? I have no idea. I'm not going to watch those. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep my completionist thing from trying to compare these 3 terrible films. That said, no, probably 4 is worse because they recast all of the characters to play, but had them play the same thing. And the little bit that I've seen of it tells me it's absolutely awful. But it's comparing different types of trash fires. Like, it's still, at the end of the day, it's still trash on fire no matter what. So yeah, no, absolute garbage. But what did you all think? Did you like some of these films? Did you hate some of these films? Is there films here that I didn't mention that you would like to hear my opinion on? Let me know in the comments below. I will be doing the top 5 best films of 2021, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, provided any of the videos that I recorded on it turn out to be of a decent quality. Fingers crossed. Happy watching, happy reading, and I will see you all next time. Bye.